Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Nathalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So welcome to another episode with How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My guest today is Imke Hansen. But before I introduce her work, let me tell you how we met. So last year in Zürich, I attended a conference on healing collective grief and trauma with Dr Levine and Hübl, and that's where I encountered Imke. And I was immediately clear that her work belongs in this space. So let me introduce her and then we're going to hear from her. About today's guest. Dr. Hansen is a trauma therapist and a scholar. She holds a doctorate and is a Somatic Experiencing Practitioner, so we've got that in common, which is a method developed by Dr Peter Levine himself, and a scholar of East European history, who has worked with survivors of war and persecution and published on experiences of violence for more than 20 years. She specializes in trauma-informed mental health and psychosocial support for civil society activists and survivors of captivity and torture. She serves as a deputy director of the human rights organization Libereco, Partnership for Human Rights, where she leads the mental health and psychosocial support division. Libereco is an independent German-Swiss NGO dedicated to the protection of human rights in Belarus and Ukraine, founded in 2009. Dr. Hansen has been building Libereco's Ukraine work since 2014. Her work sits at the intersection of human rights, war, and trauma healing, which makes her perspective particularly relevant to this podcast audience, whether you're personally navigating grief and trauma or supporting others who are. So welcome to the podcast, Imke.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Thanks for inviting me.
So your biography says a lot, and a lot of interesting and also heavy topics, specifically in today's world we are. But first of all, I always ask my guest, how is your relationship to grief and trauma in your life? Where did this all start that you became the person who you are here sitting with me today?
It started with my own parents, of course. With my parents, my family. My parents were born during the war, and for a long time I didn't know about that. I didn't realize it, but now I can say that I understand them much better ever since I do trauma theory, trauma therapy, and I can talk to them about that. But a lot of things in our house were coined by trauma and also by a special interest regarding the Second World War. So I think it was no coincidence that I first visited with a school exchange the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum and Memorial when I was 14 years old. Mm-hmm. And of course, it made a huge impression on me. That was actually a funny story because I remember that there was a couple of people who didn't want to go into the gas chambers. And now, as a scholar, I know that these were reconstructions anyway, but as a child, I didn't know that. And our teacher then, she said, no, you're going to go because yesterday night or evening, you sneaked out of the boarding school and went for a drink to the city. So this is going to be your punishment. Well, we all know this is not not good education, right? This is not something you should do. But I remember that story, mm-hmm. So I really remember that day very much. I became very interested in the Second World War after I finished school. I did a civil service for 1.5 years with Action Reconciliation Service for Peace. And I did it in Poland also, in Krakow. And that became one of my favorite places to be with with really a lot of friends. And then I started studying political science and history, and I graduated, and I wrote my doctorate on the post-history of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And not only in my doctorate, but also all along my historical path, my scholarly work, I encountered either writings by people with trauma, or I interviewed them. I did a lot of oral history. So I encountered really a lot of people who were affected by forced labor, by the Holocaust, who had their families killed, who were in concentration camps. That was a big part of my work. And this really sparked my interest because there was something about them and I couldn't explain it. And there was at that time also very little information about trauma. I wasn't lucky enough to get in touch with the writings of Judith Herman or Stephen Porges, Peter Levine at that time. So I was really trying to do it myself, like really trying to find out what is happening with these people. Like, why are things the way they are? At some point I realized I need to find out more about trauma, because this is what a lot of people are mentioning, but it looked like something veiling to me. It was always like a curtain going down. People say trauma and then they don't say anything anymore, and no one really knows what's that and what is that doing to a person. Like in historical science, there's really no concept about trauma.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we speak about it, but no one really knows what it is and what it does to a person. So I try to find out what it is, and I looked in theory, and I looked in different practical approaches. Like debriefing was then the topic of choice when you look at, for example, the German army when they came back from the field. And then I remember my a family member. It's a little farther than a cousin, but we feel like cousins. She said, "There's this Somatic Experiencing Introduction by Heike Gattner in Hamburg, where I live, and maybe you want to go." And I thought, yeah, why not? I'll go. Like, first of all, in our family, it's not advisable to act against the suggestions of female elder people. And then it turned out that this was really a good choice, because I went there and I thought, oh my God, I'm a historian. Everyone else will be in a helping profession, either being a psychologist or like medical stuff or someone like this. And there will be probably a lot of Latin. I hardly remember my Latin. But then I came, and Heike Gattner, she almost only spoke about the Second World War the first day. And she, in the first 2 hours, she answered 5 questions that I didn't even have to voice. She just said something, and I had situation after situation that I experienced with my interviewees when I was doing oral history about the Second World War, just lightening up and understanding. And it was this like, wow, now I get it. And then after that, like very insightful 2 hours, I understood that I have to learn somatic experiencing, because there is a lot behind that will be useful for me. But my goal was then to just learn how it works, get the theory, and apply it to my historical research, and maybe even establish a definition in history. But I really didn't want to become a therapist. I really didn't think that this is where I need to go. And then there was this other track of my life. I was always very much interested in civil society and volunteering somewhere. This is also coming from my parents. They're very active for the community, very, very aware. I came to this work with Libereco because I spent, right after I graduated, a year in Belarus and was a fellow at the university in Belarus, and also working together with some human rights organizations there. So the founder of Libereco contacted me several times and asked me if I don't want to become a member. And I declined for some time, but then I thought, okay, I'll do it. That became increasingly important. And I remember that in 2014, after the Maidan, the demonstrations in Ukraine, mainly in Kiev, but there were also local meetings, local Maidans in other cities.
Maidans meaning?
Maidan is the Ukrainian word for the main square, right? For the main square. So Maidan is how the main square is called, and as things happened on the main square, this word became the word for the protests. And and it was right before the beginning of the war in spring 2014, actually already in February 2013. So, but it was exactly this. It was on the brink of the war. It was really this period. And we did a conference with human rights activists, and there were mainly people from Belarus, but also some people from Ukraine who were talking about things there and what is happening, and showing us videos and a documentary about the Maidan, really fresh material. It was very clear to me I need to do something there, and I decided that I want to build up the work on Ukraine within Libereco, within this organization. So I did that just with
Can I ask you a question? So when you said very clear, there was very clear images or a video on specifically what?
On the demonstrations and on people getting shot at the demonstrations. There was a huge wave of violence of special units against the protesters. This was a very, very big thing in 2014.
Okay, so the realization for you, there's people traumatized here, or there's people who need help.
The realization then was more human rights are violated, and people are really struggling. People are fighting for democracy and for remaining a democratic, but they're going to the streets, but they're turned down. And so it was more the human rights personality that said, okay, you need to go there. You need to find organizations, do something together with them. And that's how I got there. And I met wonderful people and really, really cool organizations. And I started cooperating together with others we started to cooperate with them. And I engaged more and more. And up from 2016, I was directly working in the war zone. That was then the east of Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. We need to catch up here a little bit, because as I was saying to you before, before we started recording, in your biography, I say when Ukraine's work started in 2014. And as far as I think many people around the world have known, the world probably still thinks the Ukrainian war still only began a few years ago. Can you catch us up on what that actually is, of maybe what some of the listeners might also not know?
Yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine, first Crimea, and then also the Donbass, Donetsk, and Luhansk region in 2014. And it was, how to say that diplomatically, it was not covered as what it was, because it was an invasion by the media, and also politicians in other European countries failed to address it as what it was, like a country invades another country. And the annexation of Crimea was in 2014, and fights in Donbass were ongoing since 2014. 2014 and 15 were especially difficult. Also 2016 was already getting better. And then there were a couple of years when it was definitely calmer in terms of warfare. And we engaged in these war zones, and really in a civil society support way. And there I really realized very much that the biggest obstacle to coherence, community work, and civil society activity is a lack of cohesion and conflict that is rooting very much in trauma. We started the first really trauma aware and trauma responsive project in the area that is worked with activists who are local, who have maybe not even an organization, just a little initiative. And that was very interesting. And I still had my university career, but I went there whenever I could, all the holidays. And in 2019, I decided to pause my university to exchange my work and my free time activity. Before it was, I was a scholar, a professional scholar working at university. And my free time, I did human rights work. I did this kind of trauma-informed human rights work. And then I exchanged it. And now I'm a scholar in my free time, writing articles about what I do. And I'm a full-time human rights practitioner and somatic experiencing practitioner. And I'm really pushing this trauma awareness in human rights, in peace building, in humanitarian aid. This is mainly what I do. So it started then. And I moved in 2020. I fully moved to Severodonetsk, as we called it then. Now it's called different. And lived there and worked with a Ukrainian team. That was like really, really interesting work and great to really be in a war zone. It was really, for me, the first time that I'm like continuously living in a war zone, really understanding what's going on. And I did that until in 2022, the full-scale invasion began. Russia invaded Ukraine on a full scale. And that changed quite a lot because the part where I lived was occupied pretty fast. And the center we had built up there, like a civil society center, the organization fled to the west and later returned to Kiev. It was like 2022 was very chaotic. And I also pulled a little bit out of the trauma work because in this very acute circumstances where everything was missing, like medicine was missing, even food was, or like everything was missing. So I was the first weeks and months of the full-scale invasion, I was very much engaging in humanitarian work and logistics, just getting stuff, getting money, getting all this into Ukraine. And it was very much on, like, I think every one of us was living and working in 2024 on a constant fight-flight response. So we were activated so much that we were on very high adrenaline and did everything on this very high adrenaline. And if I see it now, I think, oh my God, how can you get so much done and survive that? What we did in 2022 and also 23, it was like, wow, okay, that was really a lot. In 23, it turned more for me already towards, actually already in 22. 22 was also the year where we started the first somatic experiencing education, like professional education for Ukrainians and Belarusians. So I contributed to raising the first generation for the Belarusian exile community and also for Ukrainians. Now we're doing the second professional somatic experiencing education already in Ukraine. I'm very, very happy that there are trainers and assistants who are coming with us to Ukraine despite the war and despite the difficulties. And and my work became more and more from this like short interruption and this excursion to humanitarian logistics, I then turned back to what I really like to do, which is psychosocial support, trauma therapy, but also training people. And the focus is on activists, because this is also a focus of my organization. And what I am very interested in myself is people who have survived severe violence. Among them, of course, veterans who have severe combat experiences, but also people who come back from captivity. You said it in the introduction. There's a huge number of Ukrainians that who are in captivity, and there are exchanges of prisoners. You hear that from time to time in the media. So more than 90% of these people have experienced torture in Russian captivity. So these are people who need specialized care.
Mm-hmm.
And as Ukraine is a country that after the Soviet Union did not have as much time to develop as for example Germany had after the Second World War until today, a lot of things were not set in place in terms of how to deal with people who have experienced overwhelm through being witnesses or affected by massive violence. And the whole topic also, I mean, it was a very strong stigma in the Soviet Union. Everything that was associated with psychology was stigmatized. And you can still see that. It's still a pretty difficult thing. A lot of people don't trust psychologists, don't trust therapists. A lot of people believe that having symptoms of whatever kind is a sign of weakness. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not an easy work. It's not something where everyone is happy to see you and everyone thinks that what you do is great. Like there's a lot of suspicion towards what we do. Again, I met all this way I described to you. I met great people who were looking in the same way. It started with the local police in Luhansk. And I'm still working with people from there now who changed from the police to a NGO organization and are closely working
Mm-hmm.
together. So basically from 2015, I collected these fellow activists and people who are interested and who then also did the somatic experiencing education or are doing it now. And this way I managed to build up this island of somatic thinking and practicing among the crisis response in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, and this is also what for example my teacher said, what Peter said, this is so far a pretty unique thing that you're introducing somatic experiencing to a country that is in the middle of a war, and
Mm-hmm.
that you're building up a whole system of crisis response only on the base of a somatic approach to trauma. So that's what I'm doing now. That was a long story.
Take a breath, because I mean you've shared so much already about your personal history, about the history of what has happened since the war started in the Ukraine, and you know, like what I have heard or what I felt listening to you is that, and also reminiscing about all the different guests that I had on the podcast. So there's people who experience a kind of trauma or multiple trauma or a kind of loss or multiple loss. And here you are surrounded in a culture where everyone is affected in some way or another. So this term of collective grief and trauma. So, you know, like if you can maybe describe without traumatizing people listening, but what does it actually look like on the ground? You know, what do you witness that most people in the West don't see or hear?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because only yesterday I was talking with my Ukrainian colleagues and we were saying we need to display more what's actually happening on a daily basis. What I see is that in the past years, since February 2022, almost all the people I knew, they went and started initiatives for helping people, protecting infrastructure or restoring infrastructure for all kinds of things that are necessary. What I saw in 22 in volunteer work is absolutely unprecedented. It's whatever train station on the way to the West you visited, there were people, like very normal people who worked before as a post officer or as a cosmetician. And now she was leading the crisis response at a train station where every day like 40,000 people came through who were fleeing and who were there with their children, with all the things they could pack, with their elderly, parents or grandparents who needed care, who were lacking insulin, and all these problems, From one day to the other, people had to change and become more aware of needs of other people, of the community, of everything. It was so beautiful. It was really so beautiful how quick people changed this role. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have, of course, after the most urgent times in 22, have then come back to their normal professions, because of course you have to make a living, right? You can't, you need to live on something. But there's a significant amount of people who have already worked in NGOs before, who continue to do that, or who came to the humanitarian work at that time, and it was his day there. But also people, like very normal people, do still like some smaller things. For example, that they take the responsibility for their house. Like, you live in a big house with, let's say, 5 floors. So you check whether they're old people, and when there is a humanitarian distribution, you make sure that they also get something, even when they can't go out of the house, and things like that. And this is happening in a lot of communities. There was also, for example, there were long times without electricity, not only last winter, but already in the early stages of the war. So in Kharkiv, people were setting up kitchens over fire in front of their houses. But this is a big city, right? This is like really like skyscrapers and big houses. So people had these yards, and in these yards, there were these kitchens where they were coming together and talking and having food together. So there was I saw so many beautiful moments, and so many people who are very, very engaged in supporting others. That was great. And of course, you also see a lot of destruction, and you hear a lot about loss, because people are dying, and also people I know and my friends are telling me about losses all the time. So we also had to get used to that and find rituals that would support ourselves and how we can support each other. And this permanent loss, that this is not only one human life, but you also understand that the people who are fighting at the front line in Ukraine, a lot of them are people who actually volunteered from the first days and who were the intellectual motor of society. So a lot of people who have died were journalists, theater actors, or NGO workers. Imagine, like, people who were teaching nonviolent communication until February, then had to go and protect their country. And I know of a lot of people who hated that, but who said that we have to do that. Like, we have to defend our families. It's coming to this. I want to defend my wife and my children and my parents, because I understand if I don't go and do it, like, who will? And this is, I think, the loss is much more present for me. I mean, the beauty and also the loss is much more present for me than the fear. And this is interesting, because normally when I'm talking to people in interviews, they're always asking about the fear. Right? Everyone knows that we are shelled basically every day. Right now I'm on holidays, and this is why I can talk to you, because when I'm in Ukraine, it's difficult to guarantee that I will be online at a certain time, because the electricity is also pretty interrupted. But yeah, there is hardly a night where you don't wake up and you hear the air raid alarm, and then you have to make a decision. You look at your mobile phone because you have messages. You are in these like news distributions. So the messages will tell you what is flying. Is it ballistic missiles? Is it drones, Iranian drones, whatever? And then you have to make a decision. Are you going to go to the shelter or are you not? And if you're not going to go to the shelter, are you going to go to the bathroom because it has no windows, so you won't be hit by the blast shards? Or are you just staying in your bed and trying to fall asleep as soon as possible? And most people, like, when it's not really hard danger. When it's just drones, no one is leaving bed, right? Only people with small children. But you stay in your bed, you hear the drone, it's flying above your roof. It's a very weird sound. Sounds like a in German we say moped. Like this is a very
like a little motorcycle.
Yeah, very little, very trashy motorcycle. And this is how the Iranian Shahed drones sound.
So how does the nervous system react to that? I mean, as you're talking about this, I can imagine when you're saying every night you're waking up. I mean, first of all, that in itself, but then not just waking up because you're waking up and going to the bathroom, but because there is some kind of alert. How do you deal with that on a nervous system level?
My system doesn't go into alert when it's hearing the air raid alarm anymore, because it's permanently, I mean, there's so often air raid alarm that like normally I don't really activate, but you activate a lot when you wake up from nearby shelling. And this is a full body experience because the earth is shaking, and very often you hear the sound of the flying before, like a whistling, or the sound of the drones. And then you hear how they're shot down from the sky by Ukrainian defense. And this is a moment where this is like a mixture of joy and relief, because the moment when you hear them explode, you understand that they didn't hit anything. You can actually hear that they were shot down in the sky, and then the parts fall down. And if that is very close, then you also hear that, or you have rubble on the street. Yeah, it's very different from a hit. Like when something is hit, that's a different sound. So it's more curiosity, I really try to listen. I don't close my window. I really try to listen so I understand the sounds. So my nervous system is fully in orientation. And so
it has sort of adapted to the different sounds and what they mean according to where you are in this war zone.
I need to understand that to understand what's my position right now, right? I'm not always in Kiev. I'm also spending a lot of time in Kharkiv or in Odessa. So I need to understand the sounds and where they're coming from. And everyone knows if there is a Ukrainian defense system, like in the backyard or somewhere there, because it's very loud. So not every loud noise means danger for you, and you need to understand that. But by this massive orientation, you're pretty, like, it keeps the nervous system busy and well oriented. And the orientation is really, really giving the nervous system a good self-regulation. So you become more regulated, and then you can make your decision. And these are moments. And usually it's even with a hit, even when you're in places in the East. I remember I was in Kramatorsk, and we were sleeping. It was night, and there was a detonation. There was shelling, and then I woke up.
Let's just explain. Shelling meaning
rockets flying, and Kramatorsk is very close to the front line. It's in the east. I woke up a little bit from the first impact, like the first explosion, and then came another explosion that was like really, really close. And then the windows open because of the pressure. They either break or they open, but ours were so old that they just opened. And then also, on the one hand, you feel relief because when you hear an impact, then you understand that you're still alive. So this hasn't hit you, right? The sound of the impact tells you, I survived this one too.
Yeah.
But still, your heart is then
pounding.
is pounding, is really pounding, and it needed some time. I understood, like when it got a little bit calmer, I understood that I really have to go to the toilet. But it was too scary, not for any realistic reason, like not for anything real, because like it was already silent. But I needed to take a couple of more minutes to calm down, to be actually capable of standing up and leaving my bed and just going to the toilet. So yeah, that's happening as well. But still, these are situations, they're mostly happening at night, and they drive your nervous system up. Where we work, we are exposed to these situations quite often. So my nervous system also got used to very quick self-regulation. I very often am in situations where I have to co-regulate other people, and sometimes also many of them. So, the nervous system regulation really works. as I said, I find the loss has much more impact on the body because it's providing you with this bitterness that you feel inside. And also you have this thought that, okay, even if things will stop very soon, things will never be like before, right?
It's like a permanence
Yeah,
with that loss,
it's
right?
a lot of permanent change, and you feel your life and your environment changing so fast that you hardly can keep up with that.
Mm-hmm.
And defending your own work and keeping up the organizations, not only ours, but also protecting and stabilizing the partner organizations, is just becoming more exhausting if you're exposed to, of course, to lack of sleep during the constant shelling.
Mm-hmm.
And also, of course, because you see what's happening and this is not even only loss that you personally experience. For example, when the child hospital in Kiev was shelled, that was I wasn't even there, but that was such a day where you really felt that nothing is safe and no one is safe, and this is like really another step away from humanity. It's not only this loss of health lives, it's also loss a more and more of this idea that we're all friends and
believe in humanity.
yeah, we have a belief in
humanity.
humanity. People are trying to act in a human way because, of course, I mean, it's happening here and there, but in Russian captivity, it's very disturbing when you see. I mean, I don't even only hear stories, right? I see in people's bodies what has happened.
Yeah.
And so you have really you perceive it on every level. And the good thing is that I'm so curious about it. So I can really see it as an opportunity to learn and to be better prepared to help this person and better prepared to help every other person. But it's an experience, right? It's really a
intense experience.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's an intense experience, and it's changing you very much.
First, you mentioned rituals to keep you grounded, but you also mentioned you need to regulate a lot of people. So what does trauma-informed support actually look like in practice? Maybe as a support person, but also as a friend or a member of the community. What does that practically look like in your day-to-day life?
Well, first of all, it's the imperative of yourself being regulated. And this means that you should not mess up your nervous system, because this is your responsibility, not only in front of yourself, but in front of others. If I didn't sleep, not because there's a air raid alarm, but I just went to bed late because I watched a movie or something, I will feel that in my nervous system. I will feel that in my capacity to regulate myself and to co-regulate others. If I drank alcohol, I wouldn't be like in that moment, but also the next day, my capacities to regulate myself and others and support others would be severely limited. So you change your life quite a bit. So what is a trauma-informed crisis response in general? Of course, it is a lot of self-regulation. It's a lot of contact with people who have never heard of trauma before or really have never really understood what it is. And you're explaining again and again that trauma is an unfinished defense response. And that a defense response in that situation is not only something very natural, but that a defense response against a threat is something they can be even proud of. And only the stuckness in this defense response is what makes the symptoms. Mm-hmm. So we're not we're not trying to prevent defense responses. People have to defend themselves. These defense responses, they save their lives and their integrity, and they're actually very brave and very good. But we show them that what is disturbing them now was saving them once. And only when you got stuck, then it becomes unnerving, and then it becomes disturbing. It's like when listening to one of these old vinyl records. Mm-hmm. And if you can listen to the furious classical music sections, then it's a very uplifting moment, and then it comes back and the next piece is an adagio and you can actually calm down. But if it's getting stuck on a con
Piece.
brio piece, right? And you have that again and again and again and again.
It drives you nuts.
It drives you, exactly. It drives you crazy, and it would drive everyone crazy. And that's basically what's happening. The people are losing their rhythm, the melody of their nervous system. And what we're doing is trying to support them in getting it back. And
That's a nice metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we understood what helps very much is collaborating with nature, especially collaborating with water. Water offers so many metaphors that you can use for understanding self-regulation, for understanding how the nervous system works, for understanding post-traumatic growth. So what we do in summer, for example, we have these summer retreats where we invite people from the cities that are very affected, the activists who work with others, the people who accompany people who come back from captivity. We invite them for a week to these mountains. It's a very, very remote area. And we have this mountain river right next to us. And it's big enough that you can actually go in there and swim there a little bit. So we, for example, train self-regulation by means of going very slowly, titration, we say in somatic experiencing, very slowly and very regulated into the water from the mountain river. It's not very cold, but I don't think it's
cold enough.
It's cold enough. It's like 10 or 12 degrees Celsius in a good summer day, I think. And this is how people learn it, right? And this is how people also learn to do things slow, for example. And a lot of people have made the experience in 2020, like in the 2022, when the full-scale invasion started, that they just have to push through with everything. They just like whatever they do, they mobilize a lot of adrenaline and then they push through. And I did that myself. I mean, most of my life, of course, because I have my own trauma story, as you can imagine, but also in that special year. But now I find it because exhaustion and burnout and frustration are so widespread in civil society and all these people who are helping others, that I really think what we need to address now is we need to change gear, right? We
change the rhythm.
We need to support people that they change the rhythm, that people don't have to do every act of support and peace and cohesion out of adrenaline and a push through, but so they can actually do it from a regulated position and out of their own choice. This is also a very big part of trauma-informed crisis work, that you work with people on the confidence that they still have choice and that they can choose whether they're going to help someone or not. I mean, of course, there are moments where you have to help. When someone is hit by something and you see that, you have to help. There is not even a second where you would choose. You would just go there and do that. But there is a lot of choice. I mean, I cannot help beyond my capacities, but a lot of people do that. So right now, it's not only the war, but it's also a whole mass of people who have exhausted themselves so badly in the first couple of years of the full-scale invasion, and many of them already before that in the first years of the war between 14 and 22, that they really have bodily symptoms. And this is actually what I engage in and what we engage in crisis response. It's many people think that we are only helping the beneficiaries, handing out these food packages, but I'm not doing that anymore. Like, it's a long time ago that I did that the last time. But what we're doing is we're finding people who are in the community somehow interested in being more active, in helping others. And then we train them so they can be active in their communities. And then other people in the community see what happened to them, and then they want a training too. We try to spread a somatic idea of supporting other people. And so with that, we also spread somatic ideas of doing things. And one of it is doing things not out of a permanent activation and adrenaline shot, but out of regulation and choice. It sounds easy when I say it, but as permanent Russian aggression is keeping us all very much in a fight-flight state, because the bombing is so frequent, electricity and general infrastructure interruption is so frequent. All my friends had had no heating in their houses during the winter. So they had to sleep in a tent on their bed. And they would heat the tent with with whatever methods they could find, because there was no heating, no water, no electricity, nothing, right? So you still spend a lot of time just like ensuring your physical survival and your physical satisfaction of your physical needs, that you have water,
shelter,
shower,
food.
that you have shelter, that you can sleep at a temperature at least like above 10 and things like that. So it is a dance between fight, flight, and also often, of course, dissociation and freeze, and this more regulated state. We are permanently on this going up and down, and my contribution is to regulate myself enough and be there enough that other people can also touch in with the more ventral vagal, more socially engaged, more calm parts of themselves more often.
Exactly, in co-regulation. I have barely scratched the surface talking to you, and I think I'd love to talk to you more in a second thing, but one of the two questions that I still wanted to ask, which is relating to what you just said about teaching others how to come from that place of not having to push through. And so after more than a decade in the field, working with some of the hardest conditions and human situations imaginable, what would you say if you were to name one or two things? What keeps you grounded? What are the things that help you keeping you grounded?
Nature. And nature is everywhere. I find a tree to bond with everywhere. And the other thing is authenticity. And it's not only my own authenticity that I connect with again and again and again, but it's also other people's authenticity. See, in an emergency situation, or in a situation that is really scary, masks drop. Our connections are very often very deep and very meaningful, because when you work for the life and health and well-being of others, of people, there is a sense also of purpose and of aliveness that is creating a very beautiful form of authenticity. So these are the two things that are most important to me.
So to end this segment today, if there was something that you would want listeners to take away from the reality of what is happening in Ukraine, not just as a political fact, but as a human one, how would you summarize that? You mentioned like a few things that are in my mind, but how would you summarize that?
So I would say what I would like people to take away from this is that my experience at war, and also the experience of all my Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian colleagues at war, is a very human experience. I very often meet people and they try to divide the world in their world where everything is peaceful, and the far away conflicts where we are working. And it's not like that. Whatever we're doing it as humans, and we also encounter very human reactions. I mean, as wherever you are, also where we are, people talk, people cry, people are mad at each other, and then they reconciliate. I think the humanness is more important than what conditions we're working in. And from my experience, I learned that the conditions where I live in and work in, they can change very rapidly. And I don't wish for anyone who listens to that to wake up and find yourself in an entirely different situation. But 7th of October in Israel and Palestine was also a moment where I got in touch with colleagues, or they actually asked us if we could tell them a little bit more about setting up a crisis response and psychosocial support. And we did like seminars, everything online, of course. So we are not the only ones. It's happening also in Iran. I mean, that's also now a pretty sudden thing for people in Iran, right? So it can happen very fast that your conditions are changing, but your humanness will never change. And the more you are in touch with your humanness, the more you can also understand other humans who might do something totally different.
Well, thank you, Imke, for today, for giving us a glimpse into your work and your life, and for all of those who want to learn more about Imke and her work. There'll be all the links in the show notes as usual. But for today, thank you so much for the time and for your openness in sharing yourself.
Sure, thank you for containing it, and it's been a lovely experience.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nathaliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.